Last summer, my friends and I planned a cross-country road trip from Chicago all the way to Yellowstone National Park in Montana. Along the way, we passed through numerous small towns, exploring the scenic views and historical sites. On the morning of our departure, we loaded up our rented SUV with luggage and snacks, and hit the road with high spirits. The first few days of the trip went smoothly as we visited many famous attractions and took countless photos. However, things started to go wrong when we approached a remote town in South Dakota. That evening, we drove into a town called Elms. This place was almost impossible to find on the map, and we only stumbled upon it because we missed an exit. The town looked old, with empty streets and hardly any people in sight. The buildings along the streets were dilapidated, and it seemed like they hadn't been open for business in a long time. We found a seemingly still operational motel called Elms Motel. The sign was covered in dust, but the lights were on. Inside the lobby, an elderly woman sat behind the counter, her face deeply wrinkled, as if carved with a knife. Her raspy voice sent shivers down my spine as she handed us the keys to rooms on the second floor. The dimly lit hallway was lined with old photos, the faces and the pictures blurred and indistinct, creating a sense of unease. We dropped off our luggage in our rooms and headed out to find something to eat. After having dinner at the only restaurant in town, we returned to the motel when it was already dark. Back in our rooms, we decided to rest early so we could continue our journey at dawn. Around midnight, I was awakened by strange noises, like people whispering in the hallway. I got out of bed and pressed my ear against the door to listen more closely. The voices grew clearer. It sounded like a man and a woman arguing, their tones filled with anger and despair. Carefully, I opened the door and saw the figures at the end of the hallway, their shadows stretched long by the dim light. The figures suddenly stopped and turned to look at me. I couldn't see their faces clearly, but I felt a cold, eerie presence. Frightened, I quickly shut and locked the door. Just then, a scream came from the room next door. I woke my friends, and we rushed to the room, finding her curled up in the corner, her face pale, and her fingers trembling as she pointed outside the window. In the courtyard stood a dark figure, silently watching us. After pulling the curtains closed, we decided to investigate. Armed with flashlights, we quietly descended the stairs. The motel lobby was eerily quiet, and the elderly woman was nowhere to be seen. We stepped outside into the courtyard, but the dark figure had vanished. The courtyard was empty except for a few withered trees and some overgrown weeds, the night wind rustling through them with a ghostly whisper. This place was too creepy, so we decided to leave immediately. We quickly packed our bags and prepared to check out. However, when we reached the lobby, we found the front door locked. We searched for other exits, but all doors and windows were sealed shut. Helpless, we returned to our rooms, deciding to wait until daylight to make another attempt. Back in the room, sleep was impossible. The noises outside continued Mutin's footsteps, sometimes shearing chills down our spines. At dawn, we decided to try escaping again. The hallway was still empty, but the air carried a strange, unsettling odor. When we reached the lobby, we found the front door inexplicably open. Without hesitation, we quickly left the motel, got into our car, and drove away from the town. As we sped away from Elms, we didn't dare to stop until we were far from the town. Only then did we breathe a sigh of relief. The memory of the previous night's events still haunted us. We decided never to speak of it again, just wanting to forget the nightmare. A few days later, we arrived at Yellowstone National Park, and the rest of the trip went smoothly. Though the scenery was beautiful, a lingering shadow hung over us. After returning home, I tried to find information about Elms but found almost nothing. It was as if the town had never existed. Since then, we have never mentioned that road trip again. Every time the night falls silent, I think of that eerie town, the figure watching us, and the ominous whispers. Perhaps some things are best left undiscovered and unremembered. That terrifying experience became an eternal mystery in our hearts, an inexplicable nightmare. Back in 2015, right after I graduated from college, a few friends and I decided to take a road trip along the California coast. Our plan was to start in San Francisco and head south all the way to San Diego. We rented a spacious van, packed it with camping gear, food, and camera equipment, ready to capture every beautiful moment along the way. The first few days of the trip went smoothly. We passed through Monterey, enjoyed the stunning 17-mile drive, and camped by the cliffs in Big Sur, soaking in the tranquility of nature. However, Things started to get weird when we arrived at a small town called Becket. It was late in the afternoon, and as the sun began to set, we decided to stay the night in Becket. It was a tiny seaside town with hardly any tourists. We found an old, shabby motel called Becket Seaside Inn. The exterior was run down, but it seemed to be open for business. The motel owner, a thin, old man with a peculiar look in his eyes, handed us the keys to adjacent rooms. The keys felt heavy and cold. The hallway was dim and damp, with faded old photos on the walls. The people in the photos looked both unfamiliar and eerily familiar, like they were townsfolk from decades ago. After dropping our bags in the rooms, we decided to find a place to eat in town. There weren't many options, so we chose a seafood restaurant that looked decent. Inside, there were only a few diners, and the atmosphere felt a bit gloomy. The waitress, a middle-aged woman with a pale face and tired eyes, served us dinner. After eating, we headed back to the motel to rest. Around midnight, I was woken up by a strange noise. It sounded like whispering coming from outside the window. I got up and went to the window, pulling back the curtain. The street was shrouded in a thin fog, and a shadowy figure was faintly visible in the mist. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, but the figure was gone. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, but a feeling of unease lingered. Back in bed, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. Suddenly, I heard a thud from the room next door, like something heavy had fallen. I quickly got up and woke my friends. Together, we went to check it out. Opening the door to the next room, we found our friend huddled in the corner, pale and pointing to the corner of the room. A piece of carpet had been pulled back, revealing a rotten wooden board. Beneath the board, there seemed to be something hidden. Carefully, we lifted the board and discovered a trapdoor underneath. We turned on our flashlights and opened the trapdoor, revealing a narrow staircase leading down. Despite our fear, curiosity got the best of us, and we decided to explore. One by one, we descended the stairs into a dark basement. The air was thick with the smell of mold and decay, and the room was filled with old furniture and clutter. In the corner of the basement, we found some old newspapers. The dates on the newspapers showed that there had been a series of mysterious disappearances in the town years ago. Several townspeople had vanished without a trace and were never found. Feeling a chill down our spines, we decided it was time to get out of there. When we climbed back up to our rooms, we noticed that the fog outside had thickened. We quickly packed our bags, ready to leave immediately. However, when we got to the lobby, the motel owner was nowhere to be seen, and the front door was locked. We searched for an exit and finally found an unlocked back door. We bolted out of the motel, jumped into the van, and sped away from the town. The drive was silent, everyone filled with fear and confusion. It wasn't until we were far away from Becket that we started to relax a bit and agreed never to talk about what happened. A few days later, we continued our journey along the coast and finally reached Santiago. Although the rest of the trip went smoothly, the terrifying experience in Becket haunted us. After returning home, I tried to find more information about Becket, but found almost nothing. It was as if the town had never existed. Since then, we've never mentioned that road trip again. Every time the night falls silent, I can't help but think of that shadowy figure in the fog and those eerie whispers. Maybe some things are better left undiscovered and forgotten. That horrifying experience remains an unsolved mystery and an inexplicable nightmare in our hearts. Last year, my friends and I decided to spend a weekend in Pittsburgh. We planned to visit a few museums downtown, enjoy some local food, and experience Pittsburgh's famous nightlife. It was about a 5-hour drive from our hometown to Pittsburgh, so we set off early in the morning. The first few hours of the drive were smooth. We cruised down the highway with our favorite music playing, and the mood was light and happy. But as we got closer to the Pittsburgh suburbs, it started to get dark, and the weather turned nasty. Thick fog covered the road, visibility dropped, and we had to slow down, sticking close to the taillights of the car in front of us. In the densest part of the fog, we accidentally took a wrong turn onto a narrow, winding road. Our GPS suddenly stopped working and couldn't locate us. The road was flanked by dense woods, looking particularly eerie. We decided to keep going, hoping to find a way back to the main road. After about 10 minutes, we saw a car pulled over on the side of the road with its hazard lights blinking. As we got closer, we noticed the car seemed empty. This made us a bit nervous since there were hardly any other cars around. Just as we were debating whether to stop and check, a screeching brake sound came from behind us. Turning around, we saw an old beat-up truck slowly approaching, its headlights glaring and blurry. The truck moved at a crawl, almost as if it was following us. Feeling uneasy, we decided to speed up. Strangely, no matter how fast we went, the truck matched our speed, tailing us closely. Our anxiety grew, and so did our speed. We came to a fork in the road and quickly chose a wider looking path, hoping to lose the truck. But as soon as we turned onto this road, we realized it was a dead end with no way out. The truck stopped at the entrance, blocking our only escape route. Panic set in. The car fell silent, save for our breathing and pounding hearts. The truck's headlights turned off, plunging everything into darkness. Suddenly, the truck's door creaked open, and a tall figure slowly stepped out, walking towards us. Our hearts raced faster, uncertain of what would happen next. Then, our phone rang, displaying an unknown number. We didn't answer, instead locking the doors and bracing for whatever might come. The figure drew closer and finally stopped by our window, knocking hard with a dull thud. We glanced at each other and decided to stay put, ignoring him. After a while, he seemed to give up and returned to the truck. We breathed a sigh of relief, but the tension was still thick. The truck started up again, slowly backing out of the dead end. Once he was gone, we quickly turned around and drove back to the main road. We never found out what that guy wanted, but being followed and trapped in a dead end was terrifying. Finally back on the main road, we headed toward downtown Pittsburgh. Though we escaped that bizarre encounter, the horror of that night lingered for a long time. Every time I think back to that trip, the chill runs down my spine.